Coming up today, part one of a two-part series ranking the Seahawks position groups from worst to first based on what I think. And I can't wait to see what you think. Ranking the Seahawks position groups coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope everyone had a wonderful Mother's Day weekend. Hey, Dan, how come you haven't done a lot of episodes the last 4 or 5 days? Because my Mother's Day experience is a little bit different than yours. In the industry that I work in, Mother's Day kicks my ass. And the last 2 Mother's Days have been epic. And this one, it took me the last 36 hours to recover from it. Still not fully recovered, but good enough to be here for you. Hit that like button on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you never miss out on notifications of future episodes. On audio podcasts, you can listen to the show anywhere, but if you want to hear it without ads, you can only do that on Spotify. It's a low monthly fee. Get in while you can at that number. And if you just want to support me or the show, hit that super thanks or buy me a coffee. All those links will be in the description. Let's get into this. I thought, as we get into May, June, really the only kind of slow time of the year for the NFL. It is truly a 12 months out of the year league. And tomorrow will be a good example. The big schedule release show is tomorrow. I won't be able to react to that live or immediately. It'll be a little later at night, but I will react to it as soon as I can tomorrow night. The leaks are starting to come out. The first one that I've seen today regarding the Seahawks comes from Dave Softy Mahler from KJR, who says that the Seahawks will open at home against the Denver Broncos. If that's accurate, makes a lot of sense. We knew they were probably going to open at home that first weekend in September. I guess technically it's the second Sunday in September. I think it's the 8th. And for a couple of reasons. One is because this is the year now with the odd numbered games where the Seahawks will have 8 home games or 9 home games to 8 road games. And so it makes more sense to have the first one at home, or there's better odds that you're going to open up at home. Also, that weekend, Sounders, Mariners out of town. It just made sense. We have talked on the show a little bit over the last couple of weeks about what we'd like to see as an opener, and Denver never really came up. But Curtis Allen, friend of the show from the Seahawks Draft Blog, made a good point, I thought, on Twitter today that maybe this is the softest landing. If you look at the Seahawks home opponents, might be the quote-unquote easiest. I subscribe to the theory there's never really an easy game in the NFL, but maybe the softest landing Mike Macdonald could have in his first game as a Seahawk head coach, presumably a rookie quarterback starting under center for Sean Payton. There's still a lot of holes on that roster. That's a team that's definitely rebuilding. We will see tomorrow if that indeed is accurate. But let's get into this. I wanted to do this, have wanted to do this for a while, and I broke it into 13 position groups. Now, some people might lump offensive line all in together, for example. I did not. I broke some of these out, and I'll explain why I break some out and not others as I go through. Came up with 13 position groups. So we'll rank them 13 to 1. And today in this part 1, we'll go 13 to 7. And then check out part 2 for 6 to 1. And as soon as that is posted, I will then edit and put that link in this description in case you have a hard time finding it. And what's my criteria? It's just kind of what I think. Like, that's the basis of the show, right? And you either agree with my opinion or not. And that's the kind of discussion I love to have. Really can't wait to see how you react to some of this. I don't use PFF grades. I try to tune out what other people are doing. Some of it is based on projection. Some of it is based on track record. Some of it is based on upside. Some of it is based simply on eye test or what I think might happen with the group. So let's get into it. At number 13. And again, I guess you could say this is kind of like grading on a curve, right? It's not the 13th ranked position group doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. We'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through. I went safety first. No pun intended. Safety first. Because this group is all about projection, and I don't know that there's a player in this bunch that looks to be a potential star. It might be one of the only groups out of the 13 that doesn't have like a bona fide, like Mike Macdonald was in Baltimore. Obviously, he had Kyle Hamilton, first round draft pick. Like that's a guy. It took a couple years for them to figure out how to use him. Some people were disappointed with his production early in his career. But once they figured that out, the talent was always there. I don't think anyone in this position group has the raw talent to project as a guy that could be like an all-pro blue chip type player. A lot of solid production here, though. Julian Love made the Pro Bowl last year. Some people kind of disagreed with that, but a very solid player. Rayshon Jenkins, again, has had a very solid career, but he's on the other side of 30 now. The best talent in this group might be the most unproven players. And that would be Kobe Bryant, converted. Seahawks still list him on the roster as a cornerback / safety. So maybe he's kind of the incarnation, the new addition of Deshaun Shedd. But I think, especially when you look at the cornerback group, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, that Bryant has more upside as a safety. And I like his upside there. And then Jarek Reed, the late round draft pick last year, who was coming off an ACL injury, might not be ready to go at the beginning of the season. Those two guys might have the most upside. And I think that speaks to why they're at 13, because I don't think either of those guys project to be like an all pro, even a Pro Bowl type player consistently, like legitimately, inarguably. And then you have guys like Jonathan Sutherland, who was an undrafted free agent last year, got some first team reps late in camp, and then had an injury he had to battle, but spent the whole season on the practice squad. Ty Okada, who was called up late last year and got some run, mostly on special teams. That's why they're at 13, because I don't see a potential star in here. And I do think as we look ahead to 2025, some were surprised that they didn't take a safety this year, but A, wasn't a great safety class, and B, they mentioned many times, John Schneider, Mike Macdonald, that they do like the guys they have. I think this is, of all the position groups, this is the most wait and see. That they might get to camp and think that they still need to bring someone in, and there's still guys out there in free agency on the street, legitimate players at that position that they could bring in. We could start to talk again about maybe a Quandre Diggs, right? Justin Simmons is probably still someone's probably going to step up and pay him, but there are players out there. But this could be a position looking ahead to next year's draft that could be a priority. At number 12, center. And again, I broke offensive line out because I think there's more to talk about here. I think it's easier to lump, as you'll see, I lumped the defensive line together. But offensive line, for reasons that I think will become clear as I describe it, I broke these out. Center's number 12. And again, I don't think this is a reflection of, just because it's 12 out of 13 doesn't mean I think it's bad. I believe, and if you've been watching the show for any length of time, you know this, I believe in Olu Oluwatimi. Do I think he's a blue chip player? Do I think he's a potential all-pro? No. Do I think he's a guy that could start for 10 years at the pivot for the Seahawks? Absolutely. I think he's this guy that's very, very solid. John Schneider, after the draft last year, when asked to describe him, talked about how stout he is, how strong he is at the point of attack, his strength. But then you also look at the fact that he didn't allow a single sack 2 years ago playing at Michigan. I think he's just a well-rounded, experienced, played over 50 starts at the pivot between, I think he started at Air Force, didn't he? Then went to Virginia, then Michigan. Am I getting that right? I think he's just going to be a really solid player, and they're counting on it because the only move they made this offseason, with the exception of Mike Nowitzki, undrafted free agent out of Penn State, who could be a dark horse to get the backup job. But the only move they made this offseason was to bring in Nick Harris, who has played, has a couple of starts, 4 years with the Browns, has history with Scott Huff at UW. But this is a guy that's undersized. And so I think when you look at what they did or didn't do this offseason at the center position, it tells me pretty clearly that they believe in Olu Oluwatimi and think he's going to be the guy. Number 11. And this might be the first one that I come to that might surprise some of you, and that's offensive tackle. This is all about, the word I kept coming back to was certainty. Talent's not a question. I mean, Charles Cross had a great rookie year. Abe Lucas had a great rookie year. Maybe the best rookie year combined of two guys drafted together, playing bookends from day one that we've seen. Some feel like Charles Cross took a step back last year. I wonder how much of that really was the injury. Those toe injuries can be really tricky, especially with a big guy like that, especially with a guy who relies so much on footwork and those pass drops. And then Abe Lucas obviously had the mysterious knee injury last year, finally got it repaired, presumably surgically, and all the reports are good. But until we see it, we don't know. They go out and sign George Fant. He's a nice hedge, but there's a reason that Fant has bounced around the league a little bit. He is a solid, if unspectacular player that can back you up at both tackle spots. They draft Mike Jarrell in the 6th round this year. Love the kid's upside, but I would be surprised if he's anywhere near being ready to contribute as a rookie. Stone Forsythe, I think, has played better than a lot of people give him credit for. Can play left and right tackle. But given when you look at traditionally how many tackles they keep, probably comes down to Jarrell versus Forsythe for that last spot. Maybe the wild card here, the dark horse, could be Satawa Lamea, who they still have listed on their official roster as a tackle, even though Lamea played mostly guard at rookie minicamp and keeps saying he prefers guard. I mean, I think I see him there long term, but maybe the reason that they haven't fully committed to him being a guard is because of this uncertainty. That maybe he's a guy that they think can still play some right tackle in the event that Lucas isn't ready yet. He could be that 3rd or 4th guy. Remember, he played 2 years at right guard at Utah, 2 years at right tackle, made all conference at both positions. And so that could be in store there. So that's why they're 11th, just because of the unknowns. The ceiling here is much higher than it is at center or safety. I think Charles Cross still has blue chip potential. I think Abe Lucas definitely, if that knee injury is fully repaired, if it's not a congenital thing or a chronic thing moving forward, I think he has the most blue chip all-pro potential in this position. And I really like the upside of Mike Jarrell. But that's why I put him at 11, just because of the uncertainty. At 10, similar argument can be made for guard. So again, I want to talk about like context here. So 12, 11, 10, center, tackle, guard. Doesn't mean that I think the offensive line is bad. In fact, let me be very clear. I think they have thrown a ton of resources at the offensive line this offseason in the right way and in a way that I think is better than they've done in addressing this position group for the last 10 years. I think the upside here and the long-term potential of this offensive line is as promising as it has been for a decade. But when you break them out, there's just so much uncertainty here, so much newness. And a lot of it is like, we really don't know what this offense is going to look like, how they're going to want to use these guys, what skill sets they're going to prioritize. And the other thing about guard is this ranking would have been much lower a few weeks ago. I really like what they've done in the last month. Bringing in Laken Tomlinson, a guy who, he's coming off a couple years in New York that he didn't grade out as well. But how much of that was due to just the extreme dysfunction of that offense in New York? And how much of it was maybe the tread on the tires is getting worn? Because this is a guy that's a workhorse, right? He plays. He stays healthy. He plays through injuries. He is reliable. They say the best ability is availability. Laken Tomlinson's available. And he's not that far removed, 5 years from an all-pro season in San Francisco. So if he shows up and he's still capable, then that's a nice little low risk, very little risk financial move on a 1-year deal. And then the drafting of Christian Haynes in the second round or the third round, absolutely love that. We got some luck that came our way. The draft god smiled on us. He fell all the way to 81. This is a top 50, top 60 player and a plug and play guy from day one. And I think a guy that has blue chip potential. And so that this guard position has in totality improved so much over the last month. And they threw some other resources at it too. You still have Anthony Bradford, who's, just a year removed from being a 4th-round pick. I'm really bullish on Satawa Lamea's future. I think when you look ahead to 2025, I think it's reasonable to think that Lamea, who they gave some left guard reps to in camp, and I think they're going to train him on both sides. I think he's your left guard moving forward of the future, and Haynes is your right guard. Similar to what they did 2 years ago. They get Charles Cross at left tackle and Abe Lucas at right tackle in the same draft. Well, I think they just drafted both their starting guards long-term as well. And I'm not so sure Lamea doesn't play well enough in camp and preseason to make Tomlinson expendable. And then they can save some money. And some of that will be dictated by Bradford because he can really increase his value this year. Let's see when mandatory minicamp comes around, do they start giving him some reps on the left side? He played left tackle some at LSU, so the switch might be even more comfortable for him to play some left side than it is for Lamea. If he can become a guy that they have confidence in that can play both spots, that would be huge. And now you have 3 young guys on rookie contracts with a ton of upside. But in addition to that, right, they have McClendon Curtis, who they carried on the roster last year all year after poaching him from the Raiders practice squad. They have Tremaine Antrim, who they signed this year as a free agent from the Rams. Veteran minimum deal, but a guy that earned a starting spot 2 years ago before getting hurt. They've given themselves options. Somebody's going to be cut from this group that they won't be able to get to the practice squad because someone else is going to sign him. Like the talent increase here is significant. And this ranking is more a reflection of my perceived strength of the rest of the roster as opposed to it being any kind of a weakness. I want to make that clear as well. Number 9. And this, I put something out on Twitter today, a little preview that I was going to be doing this, asked for some feedback, what you guys think. And a lot of people put this position group as their dead last. And I would push back hard at that. Inside linebacker is my number 9 ranked position group. It's another case of the unknown trumping the obvious upside here. In the case of Jerome Baker, a strong track record that I think people are overlooking. I mean, the dumbest thing that I've heard the last couple of months after the Seahawks signed Jerome Baker was, we just let Jordan Brooks go in free agency and sign with the team that cut Baker so they could sign Brooks. That's not how it worked. And we don't know, we may never know at the end of the day that they might have just preferred Baker to Brooks. Mike Macdonald might have looked at Jordan Brooks and thought, he just doesn't fit what I want to do. But a lot of Dolphins fans also, after we signed Baker, were very outspoken in saying that, like, this is a guy you're going to like. He can do a little bit of everything. Maybe he's a jack of all trades, master of none, where he's not going to be outstanding in any one area, but he's going to be very, very solid. And what we've seen the last couple of years, I mean, the jury was out on Brooks' ability to cover. I think he was underrated in that area. And because his reputation coming out of college, accurate or not, was that he had trouble in coverage, it was just hard for him to shake that. But I'll never forget one of the last games, the last game we ever saw him play against the Cardinals, week 17 last year, coming off an injury and covering Trey McBride 30 yards down the field and making a pass breakup, re-injuring himself on the play. Like, I think he came a long way there. But there was still some skepticism about how good he was in that area. And then Bobby Wagner, as much as we love him, love Bobby Wagner, it had become evident that his physical ability and his athletic skills had just diminished to the point that he was a liability in coverage. And so now you had Jerome Baker to Terrell Dodson. And with Dodson, I think some of the skepticism might just be that it's a small sample size. Like, what's the stat? He was the top rated inside linebacker on PFF last year based on those 10 games, but it's a smaller sample size. It's 2/3 of a season. He's 25 years old, so the upside is significant. But I think that combination of those two and their interchangeability, Mike Macdonald's talked about how they could both be the green dot guy. I think it's being overlooked and undersold. And then you add Tyrese Knight to that. And the more you start to hear and read about Knight and about Macdonald's affinity for him, the more you have to like that selection. Brady Henderson did a piece the other day where he talked about how John Schneider basically deferred to Macdonald on the inside linebacker selection. It wasn't thought of as a strong class, but there were some guys that fans liked better than Knight, certainly. But Knight was a guy that Macdonald really zeroed in on early, and especially after meeting him and talking to him about football, getting to know him a little bit in their 30 visit, he was sold. And that's why you remember in the post-draft press conference that day after day 2 or after day 3, when asked about Knight, Schneider said, I'm going to let Macdonald take this one. That Henderson reported that Schneider left that up to Macdonald, that he took Macdonald's word. And Macdonald thinks Knight is going to be a perfect fit in his system, and he's excited to work with him. And that gives me optimism that this is a solid group. Now, the depth behind those guys, very, very questionable. There's some fun skill sets there. Could be John Radican, could be Patrick O'Connell, who looked really good in the preseason last year. Drake Thomas is a guy I really liked last year when they got him off the Raiders practice squad, but I just feel like physically he's so similar in build and skill set to Dodson that it might be a little bit redundant. They might be looking for someone a little longer. And then Easton Gibbs, the undrafted free agent out of Wyoming, is a guy that a lot of people like as well. He might have a shot there. Seahawks typically, they started last season on the 53-man roster, keeping 4 inside linebackers. So one of those guys after Knight, most likely going to make the team. Right now, obviously, Radigan would be the favorite because of his special teams ability, but he's also making the most money, at least for now on that tender. It's about $3 million, not guaranteed. A lot of flexibility there. Number 8, tight end. And my thought going into this is that tight end would be higher simply because I think that Fant-Brown combo is solid. I mean, Fant's upside in the passing game is something that we've all been complaining about the last couple of years. It hasn't really been tapped into. That Waldron tried a little too hard to kind of incorporate all 3 of the tight ends instead of featuring Fant in any way. And maybe Ryan Grubb can unlock him a little bit. They certainly prioritized him. There were some reports that they tried first to bring Colby Parkinson back, but that once he signed with the Rams, that Fant became a priority. And they gave him a contract that would indicate that they plan to feature him more in the offense. And he certainly has all that upside in the passing game. But it's still, it's one of those, like, I'll believe it when I see it scenarios, right? Which is why I ended up putting him in this range instead of maybe a little bit higher. And I think Brown, Schneider says he thinks he's one of the top blocking tight ends in the entire league. And there are some out there in the scouting community also who think he has a lot more upside in the passing game than he's actually had a chance to really show. And then AJ Barner, just 22 years old. I think he just had a birthday the other day. He just turned 22, has all the potential to be a major piece of this group moving forward. And so I'm excited about the tight end group. There's just, again, a little bit of uncertainty. We have to see how it fits in. That's why they sit here at number 8. And then the final group that I'm going to touch on today in this part 1, number 7, and I think it's a group some of you might have forgotten all about and might not even think it's going to be on this list, the specialists, right? The Seahawks are so set. Do you remember the days when they would always bring a second kicker to camp? They would always bring a second punter to camp, always sign undrafted free agents in those areas, and long snappers too. And these guys are unchallenged. I mean, the bottom line is that, and I know kickers can be very polarizing, but Michael Dixon and Jason Myers are among the best in the league at their position. And Chris Stoll was apparently so good as an undrafted free agent rookie out of Penn State last year that his spot is unchallenged going into 2024. And with the new kickoff rules, it'll be interesting to see how Myers handles this. I think, based on the skill set we've seen, that he is a good directional kicker, and positioning is going to be crucial for teams trying to kick the ball to a specific spot so they can cover it as best that they can. This is one of the best groups in the league, top to bottom, period. And I know a lot of you think, I just saw something today. Somebody wrote something about how, Jason Myers might be on borrowed time because you can save some money there. Not a lot. Go to overthecap.com. Look at his contract. Can't save a lot of money by cutting him this year or even next year. He's probably going to be the Seahawks kicker given, barring disaster. And so, yeah, he's the second highest paid kicker in the league. Second highest paid kicker of all time, I believe, behind Justin Tucker. But you're not going to be able to save any money the way that deal is structured, really, unless it becomes obvious that they have to make a move there. Right? And that's the one caveat in this group, is they are also among the most highly paid at their positions. They have to be good again, or it could be an issue, but I don't expect any real problems here. So that is it for this group. So we go 13 safety, 12 center, 11 tackle, 10 guard, 9 inside linebacker, 8 tight end, and 7 the specialists. What's part 2 going to look like? Where do you think the rest of those position groups are going to land? Give me your thoughts on what you've seen so far and what you think might be ahead. Until then, follow me on Twitter, always at Seahawks Forever, and be sure to subscribe on all the platforms. Forever and always go Hawks. I'll see you soon.